right, we're ready to go now. All right, welcome, fellow headbangers, to another episode of Metal Sanctuary with my one of my favorite and repeated guests, Buddy Porter. We're going to be doing the top five King Diamond and Merciful Fate records as one top five. This is whatever album that King Diamond was on. So, to give a little bit of a backstory for me as far as my history with Merciful Fate and King Diamond, um, I didn't hear about them until the Garage Inc. compilation came out from Metallica. The first disc they had the Merciful Fate medley, and immediately upon hearing those songs, I went out and I got the last record they put out, which was the latest at the time, the album Nine, which came out in 1999. And then after that, I got like a couple compilations of, I think it was, what was it called, A Dangerous Meeting or something like that. It had King Diamond and Merciful Fate songs on there, and it just kind of grew from there. Um, I particularly care more for the Merciful Fate stuff over the King Diamond, just because I don't know, it just seems like it's a little bit more on the evil side, especially with like the first couple records. When did you start getting in to these two?
It was my freshman year in high school. A buddy of mine, I was looking through his cassette collection, and he had the King Diamond uh, single. It was for the Family Ghost, which is off of the Abigail album, and it was just like a cassette single. And I just saw the picture of King Diamond, and I was like, man, that big guy's fucking evil. And I was like, I gotta hear this. And so he played it for me. And he says, if you like that, you'll really like this. And he gave me the Fatal Portrait to take home. And I took that thing home, and I just could not stop listening to it. It was just mesmerizing the way that I had never heard of. I had heard concept albums, but I didn't understand the idea behind a concept album until I heard that.
Right, and that's only even partly a concept album. Um, I think, like for me, what I guess the shock of it all was because I got into them so late, and having to go through from what Metallica covered to the actual albums by them. It was a very big difference in the vocal department. Something I wasn't expecting, and it was something I really kind of had to kind of get used to and just listen to enough to kind of get a bit more of a taste for. Because King Diamond's vocals, there's a lot of people I'll talk to and they'll be like, I like Merciful Fate and King Diamond musically, but I can't stand his vocals, because he's got that falsetto, which, something he's learned to not use as much on his albums now. He tends to use it more as part of like a character portrayal, and he uses his regular singing voice a lot more on the later records from what I was been able to observe.
Yeah, it's definitely an acquired taste, but I like the way he can, like when he started out, he would use the falsetto, as you said, for like a character voice, representing children or like
Or
representing Molly and Fatal Portrait, representing the children and the Venom conspiracy story. And he had that kind of in between, that growl where he also used to represent grandma
right.
on those albums.
Well, since you are the guest on the show, I'm going to allow you to go ahead and start with your number five.
My number five is the 1987 album Abigail. It was his first full concept album, and it's one of those. It's kind of like Operation Mindcrime, where once you start listening, you want to hear the next song. It pulls you in, and it's just an excellent blend of story mixed with melody on guitar and harmonies. And it's a very, very dark album. A lot of people don't like this album because it does a lot with witchcraft.
Right, and that's just if you listened to anything prior to that, I mean, it's he's very interested in that kind of stuff. Um, but he's not coming at it so much from he wants to practice witchcraft. He goes a lot into historical um, accounts of witch trials and things of that nature too. So for me, that's where I can separate where people are like, well, and he does kind of overdo it a little bit in some of his other albums, that kind of a theme, but he does branch out into other things. One of the things I thought I've always thought it is really interesting with his solo albums is that every time you listen to one of his albums, there's something new you take away from the story you may not have really paid attention to before.
Yeah, it definitely. And you have to listen to them repeatedly to hear all the little nuances and stuff to actually get the full grasp of the story.
Right.
So I love the way that he makes it so you have to listen to it, but he makes it tolerable to listen to multiple times.
Right. With my number five, I went a little bit later in his solo discography. I went with Puppet Master. And the reason why I love this album so much is not just the storyline. And I'll give a brief description because I really don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't listened to the album. It's about these two people who go to a puppet show, and um, the guy's wife or girlfriend or whatever wanders off, and then he can't find her, so he goes back to find her, and he finds that she's been captured by the puppet master's wife, and there's some gruesome things that get done to people that end up becoming the puppets, and that in itself is just a really dark kind of story. But for me, I think it's because it incorporates the theme of Christmas, which is like the big celebration. It's a happy time and everything like that, and it really turns it dark. And so it kind of gives it's kind of like it's like a kick in the ass to Santa Claus, like saying, this is something that is usually celebrated and it's a happy time, but I'm going to use that and turn it into just something just twisted and dark. That's why I love that album so much.
It's a very, very dark album, and I think a lot of people didn't care as much for this album because of that aspect. I love the storyline behind this. I wasn't quite a fan of the music as well because the music seemed kind of rushed. A lot of the solos don't really match up with the storytelling and the way the style of it. But the premise of this album, I was really excited for it, and I love the story behind it.
Let's keep it moving. And what is number four?
My number four is the Merciful Fate '84 release of "Don't Break the Oath." This is almost nearly a flawless album from top to bottom. The only album, well, I guess the original release of this is flawless. I do not like the CD bonus track of "The Death Kiss." I didn't really care for that song, but every other song on this album is flawless. It seems well together, and it's just a very, very dark album, and it has the song "Come to the Sabbath" on it, which is a song that made me want to learn how to play guitar and switch from bass to learning how to play guitar.
And which is incidentally my favorite Merciful Fate song. The one thing I found with this album is that it definitely continued more of those dark themes than the previous album, Melissa. But then there was just enough of better production where it wasn't so overproduced that you lose the concepts within the songs, and it's enough of a polished product, and it still keeps everything the way it was supposed to be.
The production on this is a lot better, and a lot of people don't like this in metal, but I really love the way the production brought up the keyboards on this album. Just a haunting backdrop behind the music that's going on.
Right. For me, I go with the album "Them," the solo album "Them." A lot of people probably put this as their number one, and I can understand because I for me I like his solo albums that do a little bit less with the witchcraft aspect of what he writes. And for the premise of this album is um, King actually plays himself as a character in this album, and his grandmother comes home from this mental asylum, and when she comes home, everything is all good and well because the family's like, yeah, we got everybody back together. Then all this weird stuff starts happening, and there's spirits and there's possessions and all this other kind of stuff. The storyline I really love, but I think musically I probably like it better than anything he's done solo wise, just because I think this is, to me, the Abigail and the Them album is probably the peak of the musicianship that he had on his solo albums.
Well, this leads perfectly into my number three, which is the album Them. Um, from top to bottom, I mean, this is just a great album, and I think it's just probably some of Andy LaRocque's musical uh, genius showing on this album. You know, and the dueling guitars back and forth between him and Pete Black. Pete Black has always been one of my favorite guitarists. I think he's probably one of the most underrated guitarists ever. And but musically, this is just it's like a masterpiece. You can listen to this album, which I have done in trying to learn these. I found vocalist tracks. Uh, and just musically, it's just a monstrous album. The solos, the way they flow together, it's just seamless, and it's the music on it is very haunting alone by itself.
Right. And to me, I think it's kind of the song that I think really sticks out the most for me is the song Tea, or Time for Tea, or whichever it's actually entitled. And it's just the vocal lines in there are just so haunting. The way he sings that it's time for tea parts is just like, I don't know. For me, that's like the cap of the album right there for me.
It is. He really found himself. He found his vocals and what he can do on the album. And this album was made so great. I mean, the continuation, Conspiracy, the story is great, but it's like they really, to me, I felt they kind of phoned in some of the songs musically on the second album. There was a few that were on the second album that were written around the same time as this, you know, like Sleepless Nights and Amon Belongs to Them and At the Graves were written at the same time as them, and that's when they realized that they needed to do a second album to kind of complete the story. And it seems like the rest of it was just, you know, not quite up to par.
Yeah.
You know, what we want from a Mercyful or a King Diamond album.
And I really felt with them is when he really started learning how to harmonize the falsettos too.
Yeah, these layers of backing tracks. You know, some of those tracks I read. You know, he has like 13 or 14 tracks of him doing the same thing over and over again. You know, he's kind of pulling it. Mutt Lang and Joe Elliott there.
All right, so we're leading to my number three, which is my all-time favorite King Diamond solo record, "The Graveyard." I absolutely love this record, not just from the storyline, the vocals, the instrument. I mean, everything about this record. To me, I think it's just my favorite storyline, just because it doesn't have an ending, but you think the good guy probably wins. You know, it's this guy who, he breaks out of a mental institution, which I guess starts to be a theme of its own throughout some of his other stuff. But he breaks out because he was wrongly accused of molesting a mayor's daughter when he tried to prove that it was the mayor himself that did it. So he hatches this evil plan and how he's going to get him back and all this other stuff. Kidnaps the mayor's daughter, leads him into the graveyard, and then thus ensues a game of trying to find where the kid's hidden. And then at the end, it's like, and now I'm not going to ruin the ending, but the ending that really has no ending, because you're not really sure, even though the good guy has a fate that you don't really see coming. It's like maybe the bad guy won, but maybe the good guy did. And I kind of felt like maybe there would be like an EP type of um, sequel to it, just to kind of finish that off.
If we could have done a top 10, this would have been my number six album. And I love this album. It's probably one of the best metal albums musically ever written. Uh, it's real dark and it's really heavy, which it really threw a lot of people off on this album because it's more heavy metal than it is traditional European metal or the way of British heavy metal that most fans of King Diamond are used to. And I like it because they went there and they were able to do it. It wasn't out of their wheelhouse. They were able to execute it perfectly. And it's a great story, and I love the way that they leave it open. Because someone like me on the darker side is going to tend to believe that evil prevails, where someone like you tends to believe that the good prevails.
What do you got as your number two?
My number two is Mercyful Fate's final studio album, Nine, which you said was the first album that you got from him. This album is just amazing, and it's even better live. I saw them twice on this tour when they came to Seattle, and it's just a great album. Michael Benner and Hank Sherman playing back and forth off of each other. It's twin guitar attack, and some of the best format ever laid down. King Diamond's vocals are amazing on this album. Each song just reels you in and pulls at you and just makes you want more.
Right. A couple of things about this album that stand out to me every time I listen to it. You're not sure if it's a concept album or not because it seems like the songs could be tied in together, but maybe not really. Maybe it's more of a thematical album, not necessarily a concept album. So I always kind of try to kind of figure that out because Merciful Fate was not necessarily where the concept albums came from. That was King Diamond's solo stuff. So that's where I'm kind of like, did he try to incorporate a little bit of the King Diamond style in this, or is it just kind of maybe coincidence that they're closely together, maybe in some of the subject matter? The second thing is, the first time I listened to it, I made the really stupid mistake of listening to it while I was going to go to sleep. I figured I stay up for like an hour before I go to sleep. Anyway, I was on the ship when I was in the Navy. I went down to the ship store and bought it, and I put it in the CD player. After about the third song, I think is probably when I started dozing out. Well, I kind of woke up in like that weird kind of wakened state during the title track, the last track, Nine. I don't know what about it is because listening to it fully awake, it doesn't really bother me that much. But that song in that state, it scared the shit out of me. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, I mean, it's just the concept. It's just the style of what his vocals did on that song is. I don't know. It really had me to where I cannot listen to this while going to sleep again because that was a bad decision.
It's definitely a dark album. I don't think it was meant to be a concept album. I think it more just a thematical album, and I think it was just the combining of because most of the guitar riffs and stuff were already written by Michael Denner and Hank Sherman, and King Diamond just kind of essentially just came back into the fold and just taking some old writings and stuff that he had and elaborated on them and just came up with this just a dark haunting album.
With my number two, I'm going to go with one you've already mentioned, and I'm going to go with the second full-length Merciful Fate album, Don't Break the Oath. Like I said before, it's a much more polished style as far as production-wise. The song "Come to the Sabbath" is my absolute favorite Merciful Fate song. In fact, I have the Bell Witch EP, which features this song live, and I just love the way that song goes over live. I wish I could get a chance to see him do that song, but like not to kind of repeat anything that we've said when it was your number four pick, but I mean it's just a masterful album. The vocals improve a little bit more with King Diamond. I think obviously the instrumentation improves, but it doesn't improve so much that where they're changing so much of the formula that they did before. It's just enough of a notch up on production and enough of a notch up on the vocal quality, that really makes it a great album.
I agree 100%. It's probably and it's that's why it's up there. It's my second favorite Merciful Fate album. But the only thing that beat it was nine. Like you said, the production is great on it, and just musically, it's like they found themselves. And the production team and everything, they found a way to really express what they wanted to get across.
Time for the number ones. What do you got?
My favorite album from is King Diamond's first solo release, which is Fatal Portrait. I love, like I said, when my introduction to them, I had never really understood what a concept album was. I'd heard, talked about it, and there'd been, albums in the past that, had been concept albums and stuff. I grew up with my older cousins. They listened to a lot of hard rock from the 70s and stuff. But this album, it just, at being a kid, I was 14 years old when, in 1990 when I discovered this. So this album was already 4 years old. And it just pulled me in, and it just mesmerized me. I wanted to learn the lyrics. I couldn't understand how somebody could sing like that. And I thought for a long time that he had to be using effects to achieve that. And then you have and it's only 5 songs on the album are part of the storyline. You have the first 4 songs on side one, the Candle, the Jonah, the Portrait, and Dressed in White, and then he kind of goes off, and he does Sharon or Charon, about the boatman from the River Styx. It has a short instrumental called "Lurking in the Dark." That King Diamond plays every instrument on that except for the drums. And then you have one of my personal favorite live songs to hear him sing is Halloween. Or I'm sorry, Voices from the Past is the instrumental that King Diamond plays all the instruments on. And then there's the song "Lurking in the Dark," which is really creepily haunting. The way that they layered his background vocals on that album. And then, to come back at the end of the album and they tie the story in with the final track called Haunted. It's just, to bring the story to a close. Once you thought it had already ended.
Right. That wasn't the first King Diamond album I heard. And I probably couldn't even tell you what it is, to be honest. But I went with, for my number one, the debut full length album, Melissa. And there's a couple of reasons why I went with this album, number one overall, and Merciful Fate album. One of the reasons being is because some of the songs on here were part of the Metallica medley that they did. So those are songs I kind of already knew pieces of. And so I was able to kind of get into those songs a little bit easier and then learn out the rest of them. I think like 1 or 2 of the other songs was off the first EP. The song "Evil" just in itself is just like that. The lead track on any of those other of the other Merciful Fate albums. The the epically long Satan's Fall, which is the kind of the beginning of introducing us to that haunting laugh that he has. And it's not so overproduced that's what makes it kind of really scary. And like I said before, I prefer the kind of each song has its own kind of personality versus over the concept albums. Mainly, I mean, I like a good storyline. I think that, like, and to kind of give the subject of Merciful Fate for a minute, I think that there are some songwriters out there that can give you a song that's a story, and it's just that great on its own. And one of them that comes to mind because I was listening to this earlier is Thin Lizzy's "Phil Lynott." I was listening to Black Rose earlier, and there's a song on there, S&M, and I'm just like, that's just like a you could write an entire album about that, but the way he wrote that song, you don't have to, and that's kind of like what I feel with Merciful Fate when he writes the songs that don't have anything to really do with each other. And this album, it's not as polished production wise. He doesn't have as much full control of his vocals necessarily, but I think the musicianship on the album is, just musicianship wise, probably top two or three albums.
It's a great album. I didn't care as much for the production. It is the first Merciful Fate album that I heard all the way through. I've heard a couple tracks here and there, and but it's a good album. I enjoy some of the songs on there lyrically and stuff. A lot of it doesn't kind of mesh together very well for me. A lot of the key changes and stuff in the songs, and because the album was recorded on such a low budget, some of the time signatures and stuff they don't match up. Some of the recording, if you actually get in and listen to uh, like the guitars, you can hear that they're slightly out of tune, or one of them hits a bad note here and there.
Right. Okay, so now we got to figure out how to turn this into a mutual top five. It looks like them and Don't Break the Oath are the only two we have in common. So, what I'm thinking is let's put them at number two because that you had it higher on your list than I did, and we'll drop Oath to number three because you had it lower than I did. So now the ending and the beginning are going to be the hard part. Um, I'll give you Abigail at four. If we could put Melissa at five.
I can go for that.
And then I want to put Graveyard number one.
Graveyard, it's a great album, and like I said, I love the experimentation they did. They went really heavy with this album, and it's a very dark story. Anything that has to do with children is kind of taboo in most senses, and most people shy away from that instantly. Nobody wants to hear about anything bad happening to a child.
Right. So we're going to put that one?
That works for me.
All right. Because I wanted to be able to have it in the top five. I had it higher than them. I didn't want to put it lower in the full five. So what we're going to have is Melissa at five, Abigail at four, Don't Break the Oath at three, them at two, and the Graveyard at one.
The Graveyard is my number three King Diamond album. Like I said, mixing these two together, it would have been, right there. Essentially, it's like an honorable mention.
Right.
It should have been.
Well, we've got that top five wrapped up. So until next time, stay metal.
Stay heavy.
And God bless. I can never find on the go live part where the button is.